It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. What's up? What's happening? Craig Hoffman here, Logan Paulsen there. And if you're watching us on YouTube, you see that here and there are very different places than we usually are. Logan, it's so real that I'm doing this from a tent at training camp that I still have my credential on. People can see the thing around my neck here. That's how real it is.
That's how you know it's real. I'm in a wrestling room at a high school. That's what I'm doing. So I'm keeping it extra real today. So
yeah, for sure. So today on the show, just kind of recap the last couple of days of practice. Today was not very much. Today, Monday, for those listening at a day that's not Monday. So they didn't do a whole lot. It was a very nondescript practice. I wouldn't say glorified walkthrough because they were running it at a couple points, but no pads. I don't even know if some guys even had their shells on. Like it was very light. You never had ones-on-ones. Just a day to kind of get some, a glorified mental reps kind of in. A day to take it easier, knowing that you got a game on Friday because it is Logan finally. But also kind of, I feel like a lot of preseasons, it takes forever to get to game one. This one kind of felt like it came up quick.
Yeah, it did feel that way. It feels like it's like right around the corner, honestly. And I mean, it is right around the corner, but I felt like there wasn't a lot of and I think a lot of that has to do with kind of the situation with the pads. They kind of start with, it's like 5 days, or they have 5 days of no pads. So it kind of felt like a very OTA-ish for a while. Then they got into pads and they were kind of high flying. I think they've only had, 5? Does that sound right? 5 or 6 full padded practices. So not a ton.
Not even.
Yeah, it's maybe 4. It's not a lot. So definitely kind of came around quick. And, but it's interesting, because you got Friday's practice, you got Saturday's practice, Sunday off, and you got today, obviously, with the practice. And they do get a lot of work done in practice. I really wish I could talk to someone over there and just see, how are you so efficient with the practice tempos? And, people say, well, is it sloppy? And the thing about it is it doesn't feel like they're rushing. It doesn't feel like sometimes when you'd go watch Chip Kelly's offense when he was at Philly or with Oregon, it felt like a little sloppy. It felt like they were relying on the tempo to kind of break the defense, and they were okay with some marginal execution on the offensive end. And that's just not been the case with this team. So I've just been super impressed with that. And, even though they haven't had, I guess my point is, even though they haven't had a ton of work, they've got a ton of padded practices. They've got a ton of work done, man. It's been so impressive how much work they've been able to get done.
100%. And Ron actually talked about that today, how they've gotten a lot more work done than they have in the past. This, in chances to get different players reps, you just don't have to do as much of some of the stuff you do, the rotation, days off, days on, whatever you do with other players or in other years, because you're able to do so much and do, so many different combinations too, right? All the receivers are getting to work off each other. All the pass rushers are getting to work off each other. You've had, what feels like an infinite number of defensive back combinations. If you ask me what their starting defensive backfield looked like today, outside of a base defense, I don't know that I could tell you.
It's tough.
Because, and that's a good thing, because guys like Wild Goose have had good camps, and it's well, he's in a nickel package here, but he also is in with Quan Martin and Cam Curl here. They've just mixed and matched, and so many different guys back there that it feels like they. And by the way, we say so much of this is offensively driven with Bieniemy, but the benefits are there on the defensive side too. That you're really getting to see a bunch of different looks, a bunch of different things. There's so much, and then you go back in, and obviously you spend the rest of the day watching it, and that's kind of how it works. But then today, I'm a big proponent of, hard days hard, easy days easy. And today the ones had about 20 snaps on defense. And that's it. And you just get in, get out. They start at 9, and that's the stretching. They're done at 10:25 today, Logan. They are efficient with what they do. And there's some periods they even cut short because they just don't mess around. They get the work done. Yeah. They get back inside and they go home. That's how it should be.
Yeah, and it's just today they probably, I would assume, ran between 45 and 65 plays. But the past, Friday and Saturday they were over 100. Over 100 plays in practice. That's 9 on 7, that's 7 on 7, whatever. but they're running a grip of stuff. And I just think that's so super impressive because like at this level, at any level, the more times you get to rep it, the more times you get to see it, the more times you get to work the combinations, the more film you have to review, the better it is longitudinally for your team. Like I truly believe that the more you can rep for specific looks, the better it is for you. So I just think I think it's great. I think there's a great philosophy there. Like we haven't really talked about this, but they do that long drive drill in the middle of practice where the first and second O get like 20 reps apiece consecutively. So guys are getting conditioned. They're getting to work being tired. It's a really cool to see it. It might just feel really cool because it's such a stark like juxtaposition to what it was last year. But I've just been super impressed with them and how efficient they've been. And I think you see, like you said, you see the benefits of it for the defense too. Like when your offense is efficient, it doesn't need to be good. When it's efficient and it's practicing at a good tempo, it helps everybody. So I think that level of professionalism that EB's brought is almost invaluable, for the team because it just made everything that much more efficient and that many more reps. And it's cool to see. And again, like not every day is perfect. Like Friday was an absolute garbage fire for this team. Like in terms of offensive football, it was terrible. The defense took them out behind the woodshed and just beat them up bad. They couldn't catch footballs. They couldn't protect the whole thing. But, they're able to bounce back with a pretty solid day Saturday. And again, it's just the tempo, the energy that they're addressing this with is pretty cool. So,
yeah, talking to some folks, I wasn't there over the weekend or wasn't here because I'm sitting here over the weekend. They said that Sunday was the best practice they probably had. So, Friday is bad, Sunday's good, Saturday somewhere in the middle, kind of a nice little step ladder up to the best practice they've had. Today barely even counts. Let's talk about, though, like what went wrong, what went right in the particular days. Let's start on offense. If you had to say, like, okay, why did the offense struggle? I mean, some of it's obviously the defense is very, very good, and they had themselves a day. But drops and things like that aren't always just a result of defensive pressure or pass breakups. Sometimes there's just guys having bad days. Sometimes it's not on the same page. The rhythm's off. Like, what happened that the offense was so bad on Friday?
Yeah, on Friday, if I had to say, it's kind of like, I'm sure everyone has seen Replacements, that famous speech by Keanu Reeves where he's like, it's like getting sucked into quicksand. Like you're trying to make things better, but like by struggling, you just kind of make things worse. And I've been a part of practices like that. I've been a part of games like that. And that's what Friday felt like to me. Literally every time there was an opportunity to kind of make a play and get your offense back on track, something catastrophic would happen. And in catastrophic, I'm not just saying, like someone missed an assignment. There's a drop ball, there's a blown pressure, there's a missed assignment when it comes to pass protection, which is a huge deal. And it was just like they could not get out of their own way. And, talking to Kime over the weekend, like one of the things he said, it just felt like the defense's emotion kept ramping up, like kind of like a tsunami, like a tidal wave. Because, I can watch it on film and you can see something's going on, but you don't know what it is. And like that feeling of like the defense just having all this momentum, all the psychological momentum is kind of how it felt on Friday. And they just could not make a play to save their life. And I'm not exaggerating. Like everything was a struggle. Like there'd be a great double team combination, but they'd be going to the wrong guy. Like they'd blow the guy 5 yards off the ball, but they'd have it mistargeted. Or the receiver runs an excellent route like Cole Turner. I love Cole Turner. Great route, great separation, wide open, just fumbles off his hands. And that's not a play that he made. He's a guy that makes that play, 100 out of 90 out of 100 times, and here he is flubbing it in this situation. So it was just stuff like that. Guys kind of in the spacing wasn't right, quarterbacks not seeing stuff, the protection wasn't good. Like literally, imagine one of the worst offensive practices I've ever seen, and that's kind of where you're at. Like it was tough. And to their credit, though, they kept like the tempo was good. They ran over 100 plays in that practice. So obviously, even though it could have been catastrophic, they didn't let it get them out of their modus operandi. Right? They kept with it. They kept with the process. Just didn't go for them, and I think what it was that Saturday was the next practice. Like that practice was much more offensively sharp, crisp.
Actually, no, I think they were actually off Saturday. Sunday is the good practice. Yeah. And that practice, like Jahan looked fantastic in that practice, like creating great separation, running great routes, getting a ton of touches. And to me, he's probably the MVP of camp at this point. Logan Thomas, I think, was pushing him for it. But he's just kind of said, no, man, I've stayed healthy. I'm here. No one can cover me. I'm making contested catches, which I wasn't making last year. And he just looks like he's ready. Obviously, you got to see it on Sunday. Obviously, you got to see it in the joint practice. Obviously, there's all these kind of check marks that need to happen. But he's been fantastic. So
Like he was a bright spot for me. I think the offensive line, has really come a long way, man. Like every time we watch him, I know there's a lot of I listen to Kime's podcast, listen to Ben Stanning's podcast, and there's still a little bit of apprehension about the group. And I think a little bit of apprehension is obviously very healthy, because they haven't done it for real yet. But I just
Right.
look at where they've come from and how they're playing as a group and the physicality that they're kind of developing. And I'm like, man, if they're not there, they're very close. And so I'm hoping that through the next couple of weeks of training camp, that group comes together. Diami's another guy that did a great job on Sunday, really stood out. And then obviously, like we could talk at nauseum about the defense because they just did everything well. And on Friday was probably their best practice because the offense was struggling. But that group comes every single day and is making tremendous plays. So we could talk about them all you want, but in terms of things that I'm kind of watching more acutely, it's definitely the offense because I feel like they've got a longer way to go.
Yeah. All right. So let's circle back to a couple things that you mentioned there. First of all, just kind of the broadest strokes. The other thing that kind of made news and headlines Friday is you had a couple of scraps.
Yeah.
And Bieniemy was not tolerating it, but the one that was like interesting, and I kind of look at it for me that nobody was wrong, and I get everybody's points, but there was the point where St. Juice makes a play on Cole Turner, stands over him. Terry gets up in his face and is like, "Don't do that to your teammate." Bieniemy's then yelling to Terry, like, "Get back in the huddle." And there's something to Terry being a captain, and Ron afterwards was like, "Yeah, no, Terry stepping up there is good. Don't do that to your teammate." There's a part of me though that's like, you're your teammates, but it wasn't like he cut blocked him and took out his knees. He just, it was competition. Get back in the huddle, do your job. But I also I'm not going to chagrin Terry for standing up for his guy. So, I think one of the things that makes it noteworthy, it's one of those, it's interesting, not important, to borrow Ron's phrasing, to me at least anyway. But if you want to disagree, like, go ahead. I'll defer to you as someone who's been inside those locker room dynamics. But I do think that it's
Is this a story right now? Is this like something people are talking about?
It was more of like a talking point on Friday. I just think it was interesting that the first 2 weeks we're talking so much about the maturity and there wasn't any of this stuff, and then it's like, oh no, it's still training camp. It happens. It's gonna blow up. And I think we now, a couple of days removed, have a more complete story of they came back Sunday and everyone's cool, and there wasn't any of the way practice was described to me on Sunday was it had all the intensity of Friday without all the extracurricular BS. And I think that does show that that first week of maturity and togetherness and all that stuff wasn't a fluke, and you just had one side that was having a really bad day and got frustrated, and a couple of things happened. But that's the nature of football, and it's not a big deal. But I just thought it was interesting and worth rehashing, considering I don't get to rehash these things often with a guy who actually played 10 years in the league.
Yeah, so I mean, when I hear that, so it didn't make a lot of sense to me when I heard about it first because I hadn't watched practice yet. Then I got home and I watched practice, and I was like, this is a rough practice for the offense, And I think there are you're a competitive dude. I've been a part of teams that are really competitive. You're prideful, and when things aren't going well, guys get irritated. Offensively, guys get really pissed and they get really irritated about stuff that kind of underneath bothers them. For example, I'll just give you something from my own life. I used to hate it when the defense would make an interception in training camp and then run it back for a touchdown. It used to absolutely drive me insane because it felt like they were kind of rubbing it in your face, and that's what they're supposed to do. And it has nothing to do with me or with the offense. It's just good practice. But I used to go over and I used to try to tackle that dude every single time, because it just bothered me so bad. And it doesn't. And again, it's one of those things it's kind of a bad play. It heightens the emotion. You feel like they're making you look bad, and that heightens the emotion. And and again, I'm probably maybe projecting a little bit of my own experience on Terry here, but I just think St. Juice made a play. He's been having a great camp. He's giving you fits to work with every single day. He stands over Cole Turner, does his little thing. I'm pissed at that. I wasn't even there, and I'm irritated as an offensive player that happened. And that's one of those things back in 2010, if you did that, you might have just started a full-blown brawl right there. The running back might run over and just hit St. Juice in the back, and then we're scrapping as a team. You know what I mean? Because there's a pride and an energy that comes with those types of moments. And so for Terry to be like, hey, man, and get in St. Juice, help your buddy up, it's not about that he knocked him down or that he's celebrating. It's just the emotion of the event of the day, and it kind of culminates there. And I think, I respect Eric Bieniemy a ton, and I think he's got the right approach. get back in the huddle, man. Like there's nothing. St. Juice didn't do anything wrong. It might feel like he did something wrong, but nothing really happened. And like I told you, like if I'm Terry, I'm furious at St. Juice. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, this is BS. But it's not because anything St. Juice did. It's because of how the day is going.
Right.
So I think for EB just to be like, hey man, let's get back in the huddle. Let's make this happen. Like I get it because you've got more work to do. You got to get back on schedule. You got stuff you got to rep. So no, I don't think anyone's wrong there. Good job, St. Juice, making a play. Good job celebrating. Good job kind of being in the moment with your defense. Good job, Terry, saying something, right? Like, I respect that too. But also, like, it's more because of the emotion of the day, I think, than anything. And you got to remember, what is that, day 9 of training camp? Dudes are, like, a little fried. You know what I mean? It's like everyone talks about why joint practices are so beneficial. And a little bit of it's just because you're not practicing against your own guys anymore. It's like you've kind of taken a departure from that. So, and it kind of freshens it up. So here you're getting a lot of, like we've been fighting with our brothers for a couple of weeks now. Everything feels a little stale. Everyone's kind of pushing each other's buttons. Bad day for the offense. You get a big emotional reaction. And that's totally normal. Like, it's like the most normal thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And like, I've been a part of days like that. And I don't think anything there is a big deal, you know, at all. Like, it's just like life and people being people and being stressed out and being tired.
No, I agree. And I do love Bieniemy, though. Like, that is how you develop a next play mentality, right? Like, it's practice, and you're practicing. Hey, it doesn't matter. Like, what can you do to change it? You can get back in the huddle, and you can go kick his ass on the next rep.
Sure.
And, like, that's the only way to change it. Did you ever start any full team brawls by tackling an intercepting player?
So I used to run over and kind of try to punch the ball out, and I'd like grab him and hold him up and let him go. And I'd come back afterwards and be in the defense. You had to walk back through the defense, and they'd be like chirping and like, hey, that's nonsense. You know what I mean? And so, but no one ever did anything. The guy I used to actually get the most fights with when I was here was D'Angelo Hall, and I just feel like we were just very opposite in terms of our approach. Like, I think he thought of me as a very untalented, try-hard guy, who wasn't very skilled, and I actually take that as a compliment. And like, I would do stuff like, I think I've said this before in the show, like I would practice every snap like it was a full speed game. So I would do stuff that like some people didn't really like. So I'm well aware of that. And D'Angelo, he's in year 13, I'm in year 4, and I'm gonna like hit him extra hard on a screen, and he's not going to like that or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So I remember it was one year it was like 3 or 4 days in a row. We got in a little bit of little tiffsies, when I was here. So like I get in fights a lot, but it's like, again, I know what I'm doing, when you get in a fight. I know I'm kind of pushing the envelope, and I think guys know that, kind of what pushes people's buttons, and like you get reactions out of people. So nothing, all's fair in a training camp fight. It's actually, I'm a big believer. A training camp fight is actually really good for morale. Just pumps everybody up. You know what I mean? Gets everybody kind of talking a little noise, everybody heated up a little bit. So when I hear that it was a little chippy, I'm like, good. Everyone's passionate, and football's important to them.
Yeah, no. It also sometimes it's good to get it out of the system. Like, you just
get it out. Yeah, get it out.
All right, we did it. We fought. Now we hug it out, and then we go keep playing. Oh, Bieniemy's yelling at all of us to get back in the huddle. By the way, D Hall coaching now, so I'm curious how he's down in Carolina. Curious if his guys are getting chippy.
I've heard Fletcher's talked to him a little bit and says that he's having a really good time coaching down there. I don't know what type of guys he's coaching down there, in terms of, are they D Hall guys? But I think he's a very bright dude, and he's going to be a great coach. So
for sure. D Hall's a good dude. So I'm excited to see what they do down in Carolina with him. All right, back to these Goobers here in Ashburn. Take a Man podcast. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulson with you. All right, let's wrap up a couple of other like offensive things, and then pop into the defense a little bit. The one area that's gotten, I think, fairly consistent praise is the run game. Now, It is training camp, but I trust your eye on this more than anything we could possibly see from the sidelines in our one watch from the world's worst angles. But the results seem to be there. But what have you seen in the run game, and do you think it's stuff that, by your experience, can translate into the regular season?
Yeah, I mean, I really do. I've been really impressed, and it's kind of changed my philosophy after watching this about what it takes to cultivate a good run game. I used to be a believer you got to have the pads on, you got to have the helmets on, you got to be hitting guys. They didn't do that all offseason, and then they came in. What was that? 2 Fridays ago now, it was about a week ago, and they came out and like put the gauntlet down from a run game standpoint, and really did an excellent job. And I think that has just continued. And everyone talks about 9-on-7, how the defense is looking good in 9-on-7. Like that's a defensive drill. So in
Right.
that drill, in those drills, I'm looking for more combinations and how those guys and how they sync. And then again, like the kind of relationships between the offensive linemen and the physical approach and the physical mindset. And when you watch that period specifically, it's it's pretty impressive. I think it's pretty impressive where they're at from a run game standpoint. And I think like they have a whole bunch. We can't really talk too much schematically about what they're doing because of the media agreement with the team. But they're doing kind of multiple different types of runs stylistically. They've obviously got a little RPO in there, which everybody they were going to do. And I actually think those are like their least efficient looking runs, but because guys are unblocked, like in an RPO, you got to read one guy. But on the runs where everyone's blocked, guys seem to know where the targets are going. They're creating great movements against a very good defensive front, and I think it's something that they're going to be able to hang their hat on. And it's funny, like, and I mentioned this before, and I'm going to say it again. As they've gotten better at blocking those runs, the pass protection and the physicality and the pass protection is getting better. And I think that, like, when you look at that first offensive line right now, especially, and we should probably talk about this. This should be its own thing, but like with Chris Paul coming to that lineup, that starting five is starting to look like a really nice group. Cosme is occasionally losing to Deron Payne, but like in the one-on-one settings, he's doing a great job. He's blocking well. I think he's going to continue to progress. You feel good about him. Wiley's actually, I think, done a really nice job improving on some of like the power bull rush stuff that I was worried about early. It's not perfect, but it's definitely getting better. Gates is a big physical son of a gun. Chris Paul might be the strongest dude on the team. Like when he puts his hands on people, he's in positions that aren't very like leveraged, advantaged. He's kind of tall or whatever, and he's able just to kind of lift John Allen out of a spot. And when he's working with Leno, like they're able to create some tremendous movement. So I think that starting five, all of a sudden, you add John Bates as kind of that extension of the offensive line, is looking pretty good. I mean, like it's just to me, it's super interesting. It's super interesting to see how far they've come in the last five practices or so.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, but I feel like I know the answer. Like, is the position battle over at left guard? Like, is Chris Paul already the starter? I know that Sadiq. Like, I don't know that Ron's gonna say that yet because Sadiq is still coming back from injury and he's still playing some. I think today he was back out there and had a couple reps with the ones, but like largely it was Paul. And to see the difference is like the evidence is there. Like I just don't know how, based off availability and based off what you actually see when they're out there, how you possibly go back to Sadiq at this point, because it's also not like Sadiq is sitting on some resume. The only thing Sadiq has over Chris Paul is draft position. Like they used a third rounder on him, but that was a long time ago at this point. And he's never, like, despite getting the opportunities you get as being a third round pick, he's never actually been able to stay on the field. And when he's been on the field, he's been very, very inconsistent. So he doesn't have a lot of experience. The draft pick, resource allocation, argument is I would say expired. Yeah. And at that point, like what reason would there be to not start Chris Paul?
Yeah, after watching him since Sadiq's calf injury, I don't have a lot of reason why I would go with Sadiq. I think Sadiq's maybe a better athlete, but I think when I look at him, Chris, from like a pass protection standpoint, from like a combination standpoint, he's not the most fleet of foot guy. He's not a bad athlete, but Sadiq's an exceptional athlete in terms of movement skills. But I just think Sadiq is much more, or not Sadiq, Chris Paul is much more consistent, like down to down. Like we talked about early on how Sadiq was having a really hard time consistently even stalemating with John, right? And it was just kind of like John was just creating a ton of pressure. He was winning every third rep, which is not a great ratio for an offensive lineman. And then I thought, well, that's just John. Like John would do that to anybody he's practicing against every day. And then Chris comes in and John is still having great practices, but it's just gotten so much more quiet. And the pressures, the wins are like more they look more like NFL wins, which are kind of muddy, right? Chris is fighting, John's fighting. There's a little bit of pressure. The quarterback's kind of got to shift away from it, but the ball's out, as opposed to these like lightning quick wins that Sadiq was giving up to John like every day. And so I think that to me, again, like I don't know if it's a big enough sample size. You could make an argument that hey, Sadiq got him early in training camp, whatever. But like, it's just been way more consistent, way more professional looking when Chris is in there. And, they have access to all the meetings. They have access to all this stuff in the film room. And maybe Sadiq is doing an excellent job in there. I have no idea. And they feel really comfortable about what he does from a mental standpoint. But at least from practice production, I would say I'm in Chris Paul's camp right now, in terms of a guy that I think makes this group better. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's hard to disagree with that. The thing is that people, I think, need to understand just from a human capital management standpoint is there's no reason to rush to make decisions until you have to make decisions.
Right.
I realize that makes all of us antsy. And there are times where you cross a threshold that, like, for instance, with a starting quarterback, where there's such a wide impact on the rest of the team, if there's indecision there, it can be good to get certainty, right? But on something like a left guard on 2 guys between 2 rookie contracts, there's no reason to land the plane prematurely. Right. Like, you keep your options open, because what happens if you name Chris Paul your starter, like, definitively, right? Like, you do all the same stuff otherwise. It's just a verbal proclamation, right? But you're giving him all the reps, you're treating him as the starter, but you don't, when you're asked about it, it's like, we're still letting that battle play out. Then you say, all right, he's the starter. He gets hurt or he has a bad week, and you're like, oh, I don't know. Going back, like, do you lose Sadiq mentally? Like, there's all this like psychology that goes into this stuff that just means you don't. And to me, like, it's just don't make a decision before you have to. Where you could lose a guy, you could set someone back, whatever. Just keep all your options open. Let it play out. When it gets to the point you have to make a decision based off of, hey, it's week 1 or hey, it's the week before, and we need to like actually make a decision because there's urgency to that, then you make the decision and you move forward. So I know everyone's in a rush to know everything, but like there's actually not a deadline here.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, with Chris specifically, because of how raw he was technically last year, like I would expect him to look really good the more reps he gets against the defense. So if I'm kind of waiting for something for Chris, if there's any kind of question, it would just be how's he going to look in the first preseason game, and then how's he going to look against Baltimore? Like, does he play with the same consistency against someone that he doesn't see every day and doesn't have a plan for? Because you mentioned it's pretty even, and I agree it's pretty even. But Sadiq has at least played significant time as an NFL starter for we're talking significant, like 3 to 5 games, whatever it is.
I don't know if I would go significant. He's played some,
but Chris hasn't. He's played 1 game
sure.
in a game that doesn't really mean anything. So. There's the experience factor. And again, I would be willing to make that proclamation now, just having watched them. But again, I'm not in the meeting room. But if there's an argument to wait, it's that you've got 2 kind of really important data points coming up very quickly. Right. The Cleveland game, for example, and then the Baltimore practices. And I would imagine Chris is going to do great in both those. And so to me, after that, there wouldn't be any reason not to kind of say, hey, Chris, you've earned this opportunity and you're doing a great job.
All right. Defensively, I feel like so much is going well, which is great. Anything, I would say the biggest question mark right now is Jamin and what they're doing with him. He seems to be all over the place, some with the 1, some with the 2s. He's gotten some reps with the 3s. Like, I just don't know kind of what's going on there. But let's start with the good stuff. Like, what is going well defensively that they are able to show up so consistently, that they're executing well, despite personnel going in and out. Like, it doesn't seem to matter who's out there. They're just acting as one good cohesive unit. Yeah,
I think let's start with, you mentioned Jamin. Can we talk about Jamin for a second? I think that would be appropriate. So Jamin on Friday, and I think on Sunday too, he's starting to, he has some splash plays, which is something that when he came here I thought would be happening more. And so I think that's really nice to see. And I think you're seeing him look a little bit better in coverage. Again, his run fits, like when he goes, like it's like the classic first round draft pick thing. Like when a first round draft pick who was just physically a little bit better than everybody goes, like you could be watching the DB and it would flash in the corner of your eye, like who the heck was that? And you're like, oh, that's Jamin. And at least for me, when I've been watching the film the past couple of days, like he's done that. So I think that bodes well for him and his development. And again, there's a lot of stuff going on with Jamin, which I'm not going to talk about here, but like,
Sure.
I think from a football standpoint, I like some of the stuff I've seen from him. He's been very physical, 9-on-7, like he's rocking guards. Like he's a big physical son of a gun who can run really fast. And so to me, I'm like, to see more of those flashes, those kind of big splash plays, to me is something that gets me excited for him and his development. But again, like Khaleke Hudson's doing a great job, especially as a blitzer. I'd like to see him do a little bit more in 9-on-7, but like he's done a great. He's just continued to do well. Cody again has been a little bit quiet for my liking. I'd kind of like him to show up a little bit more, but he seems to be very, very consistent and understands how to take on blocks a little bit better than like Cole Holcomb, for example. So I think he'll generally be like a plus in that situation. And then Mayo, like talk about a guy who was born for 9-on-7, like that dude lives in 9-on-7 and he's excellent at it. So, if this, this was 10 years ago, he'd be probably starting for this team, but it's not, but I think that's kind of where I'd say that group is at. Then you talked about the back end, like the kind of what makes this group good. First off, the defensive line's outstanding. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And they seem to be understanding how to rush cohesively a little bit better. Like past couple of days, like I've seen Montez and John working these TEET games with each other that are, I don't know how you block them, quite frankly, unless you got Trent Williams out there. And, they're able to get the offensive line on different levels with their power rushes. I think that's awesome. A little note about Chase. I saw him rushing from like an interior line spot the other day. Good skill set for him to develop, I think, and it lets him get better rushes on the field. But I think that group's doing well. Chase, I think, is improving as a pass rusher every time I watch him, so that's great. Montez, like at times, is unblockable. Deron, same thing. Big Phil and John are kind of who they are. And then the depth pieces are doing great. Like Casey, was that Friday? Looks like a varsity rusher, man. Big varsity rushes, making very disruptive plays off of stunts and off of edge pressure. James, same thing. So, like, that group is just – they're playing really well. They deserve a ton of credit. The back end, I think, is where kind of the magic is made, so to speak. I think they're just doing a great job with this man match, zone match, kind of disguising coverages, guys being on the same page. Like, I don't know what led to the change, if it's just not having – William Jackson III back there, but everyone just seems to kind of be seeing the route combinations in the same way. So you don't get any of these like wide open busts. Like there was a pretty open throw on Sunday to Jahan. Jahan had a couple, but they were in man-to-man situations, and Jahan is running a route against Holmes, and Holmes basically falls down because the route's so good both times, and Jahan's open by 20 yards. That's the only time you see anything like critically break down. But again, that's a matchup I would expect to favor the offense.
Right.
But in normal situations, it's just like they see it well, they're playing fast. And I think you've mentioned this a couple of times, Craig, is the speed in the back end coupled with physical football players. It's a very valuable combination. You see why people run 40s at the combine, right? Because they can just chew up grass in a way that is it makes it hard to make throws, and it makes it hard to get yards after the catch. So I think that to me is kind of where the magic is made. And if this defense is going to be a top 5 group, if that group can kind of go from like good to excellent, I think that's where that's going to happen.
100%. And like if you think of the quote from play callers, spatial Darwinism, right? What's one way to cover more space? Be fast. If I can get to that spot faster, or I can cover more ground, like my circle of area that I'm covering is bigger. And that means there's less open space for the offense. And if you multiply that by like 4, 5, 6 DBs, now there's just not a lot of open space. And so I think and by the way, if you mix it with good anticipation, good understanding, like it's incredible. And guys like Forbes, who have this great route recognition, even as a rookie, he hasn't seen anything yet, and he's already got it. Wait till he gets some reps under his belt. Guys like Cam Curl, guys like Kendall Fuller, obviously. BSJ's had a great camp sliding in and outside. There's just a lot of really quality players that and the other thing too is they communicate so well. There's been so many times, like, we can hear Visselmeyer pretty well. He's on the back end, the DB's coach, for those that don't know, and kind of from where he stands on typically the hash closest to us and being behind the defense at a depth that typically a lot of us try to stand at to see from the sideline. Like, you can hear him say, like, great communication, great call, good switch, good that, good whatever. And he's constantly complimenting how the guys are playing together. And, there's something to a defensive back unit playing together where even if you are not technically right, you can make each other right. And that's the most important thing. Like, are you right in the end, even if it's not in the way that it was called or you drew it up on the whiteboard? Do you understand how to play off of each other so that if someone makes a mistake and covers the flat instead of, the curl, the other guy goes and compensates for it, and now everything's covered, so it doesn't really matter. Like, these are the types of things playing together that have been huge bugaboos for this team over the past couple of years. You just had straight up busts in big plays, and we know how valuable big plays are, to an offense and against a defense. And not giving those up, I think, will be huge. And I think the other thing, Logan, to kind of tie it all together is how close has Montez been to a 18 sack season the last couple of years if he had that much more time. Or John or Duran or, obviously as Chase works back in, guys like James, guys like Casey. Like, there's so many quarterback hits the past couple of years on this team where if the ball could just be held for another tenth of a second, they're sacks. And I think the better coverage is going to lead to more sacks this year, which puts you behind the chains, which then compounds the problem of a great pass rush with a bunch of ball hawks on the back end. And that is why I think this team has so much upside in terms of defensive potential is they've got the ingredients to make big plays, and some of those big plays are going to generate even bigger plays because the coverage and the rush should marry so well together.
Yeah, and I think another reason you feel really good about it, honestly, is that this idea that they're going against I don't want to say a real offense because that sounds like I'm being negative towards Scott, but it's an offense that's a little bit more comprehensive in terms of how it challenges spaces, how it challenges some of the things you're talking about in terms of passing stuff off, the tempo, the protection rules, the chips, slides, the screens, and so for them to be matching this stuff at a really high level versus this offense that has, I would say, a little bit more down-to-down complexity than you've seen, to me makes this feel a little bit more real than it's felt in years past. Because, I've covered the team now for 2 years, and one of the things that consistently comes up is is the offense doesn't look good. The offense doesn't look like it's ready to go. And then now when you watch this offense, the offense to me looks good. Like, it just conceptually looks good. The execution on a day-to-day isn't there necessarily, but conceptually it's right. And so when you see them passing off really intricate concepts, and when you see the rush getting home versus kind of, this slide with the chip help in the back, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, like that is going to happen in a game. That's going to happen in real life. And that's going to be a sack, or that's going to be a batted ball, or that's going to be a tight window throw. And hopefully the guy can knock it out. So I think, again, it's the defense doing stuff, but it's also the fact that they're going against something that has a little bit more complexity to it. And they're also doing that. So.
Yeah, and then we'll see, obviously, how they do against a completely different offense in Baltimore. Obviously, one in Cleveland on Friday. How would you handle Friday? We can go deeper on this on the second pod this week, on the preview pod, which, by the way, I think I don't want to speak out of turn, but our plan was to have at least one of your broadcast cohorts on. So as Logan obviously on the call for the team during the preseason. So excited for that. But I think Ron talked about this a little bit over the weekend, that it certainly sounds like we're going to see pretty much everybody, especially on the offensive side. It also sounds like you could see the one offensive line at the very least a little bit longer to give Jacoby some reps behind it. And for the first time today, we saw Jacoby get some reps with the first team offense. Now, they've been kind of, apparently, according to Rivera, looking for a place to do this, looking for a practice to get in some reps, because the reality is if Jacoby plays this season, it's going to be with those guys. And if you haven't thrown to them at all, that's been a problem the last couple of years. This team has played three quarterbacks every year since basically Kirk Cousins left. I think that actually might be literally since Kirk Cousins left. So, having those reps banked is good, even if they come in a half speed or a non-padded practice like they did today. But how would you handle Friday in terms of your starters trying to get the reps that you need now that we have this 3-game preseason and knowing the joint practices are right around the corner?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as much as people want to poo-poo this is an important part of kind of the ramp-up process for anybody, like veterans included. Like, when I was down in Atlanta with Matt Ryan, he was always like, I want to play a little bit of the preseason because I don't want my first game to be week one. I want to kind of have a little time to build up, get some of those nerves out, put my pads on, do the warm-up, do the whole thing. So I think this is important. I think it's especially important for Sam, just the process of kind of getting, being the starting quarterback under the lights in Cleveland on Friday night, like that is a big deal. And I know people want to say, it's not that big of a deal. It's a big deal. Like, let's get him situated. Let's get him. And if I was him, I'd let him, if I was a head coach, I'd want him to play as much as as much as possible. But again, you're always worried about injury, not necessarily to Sam, but I don't want one of those starting 5 guys, offensive linemen, to get hurt because they're just starting to come together. I don't want Terry, Jahan. I don't want any of those guys to get hurt. So you're always kind of managing that in conjunction with what the starter, what Sam needs. So with that in mind, I'd probably expect Sam to get anywhere between 15 and 20, maybe 25 plays, probably not. And then I expect Jacoby to come in, finish out the half. That first O-line comes out when he win at halftime, and then Jacoby gets maybe the third quarter, and then that third group is in.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting, too, with the joints because you can make an argument to play less against Baltimore after the joint practices.
Yeah, I don't think he'll play that much at all, yeah.
So you get a lot of the work in. And, I don't know, also with the schedule, too, there's a part of me that's you play – almost switch your second and third preseason games, let's get really good work in for our ones against Baltimore in practice. Let's basically not play them, maybe a drive or two against Baltimore. And then so that they don't take 3 weeks off before week one, I might actually play them week 3, where a lot of teams have kind of treated that as the old 4th preseason game. I would kind of treat that as the dress rehearsal that the 3rd preseason game used to be. And maybe even play them a full half. Just I want to stay sharp. I want to have that rhythm. I want to have some more reps together. I might game plan a little bit. Obviously, defensively, they're not going to game plan for you, so it's not quite the same. But you get in, like you talked about, going through the warm-up, putting on the pads. There's just a rhythm to the week. There's a rhythm to everything that you don't want to be going into the first time week 1. Or even it's almost like going into it the first time week 2, because week 1's so weird. You've been practicing all August and all spring, nevertheless, with 90 guys. All of a sudden now with the one cutdown day, you show up to practice 2 weeks before the season, and literally half the team is gone. There's always the one weird practice the day after cutdown day where they haven't re-signed the practice squad guys yet, and it's literally a 53-man practice. Which is jarring as hell when you go out there and there's half the guys on the field. And then, going through what it's like, this is how we run our meetings, especially with the new OC. How does Bieniemy prepare for a game week? This week is just let's get out there, let's knock off the rust, whatever. But I am very interested to see how these next couple of weeks go and how they try to build those habits, make everything as non-foreign as you can come the regular season, and carry it all with some momentum into the regular season. You're muted.
Sorry, there we go. Totally agree. Sorry, it was just people were talking in the background. But anyway, I totally agree. I think it's just kind of a thing to check off. Hey, nerves were good, got that out. Offense is good. And there's something different about being on the field, as a player, being in the huddle with the coach not standing right behind you. I know you do sideline unscripted stuff, which I think is so important. And they really emphasize that here, which I love. But there's something different. You're by yourself. You're not coming off the field. You're not rotating. You're in. And so what's it going to look like? And what kind of decisions are you going to make? What kind of self-corrections you're going to make? Ron's talked about that a lot with him. So I just think it's a good thing. It doesn't need to be crazy. And, again, I'm old school. I'd like him to get as much as possible, but you can't because there's other guys that need to be around him to support the quarterback one. So whatever. But I think it'll be a really interesting kind of test. I say test in a loose way. If he goes 0 for 5, I don't really care. As long as he's kind of on time and on schedule and the ball is getting out quick. If he looks totally disheveled, there's a lot of pressure, he can't get anything going, then I might be a little bit worried. But like, even if those incompletions are in rhythm, on time, and it just doesn't fall for whatever reason, that's a win for me too. Like, because he looks kind of, at the moment's not too big. So, and I really think your point about the fourth or the third preseason game is super interesting, because I wouldn't play my starters at all against Baltimore in that game, because they're going to play all week. Like, we've got it. Get out. Who cares? Young guys, have a field day. Get after it. And then on the third one, like, I think the idea of having somewhat of a dress rehearsal again, maybe the first drive, would be important. But who knows? Because I think based on some stuff I've seen in practice, I think they really are thinking about getting ready for Arizona. So if that's going to inhibit them getting ready to Arizona and have to prep for that third preseason game, then I could see them just kind of putting on that and moving on. So
Yeah. But we can talk about that a lot more in depth. Of course, we can talk about that with Ron Rivera because we have press conferences and stuff between now and the next podcast. So I might ask Rivera that after practice on Tuesday. Like, how do you think of the joint practices changing your preseason? How do you think of the second and third games? And obviously, how are you looking at this first one? He's talked about the first one a little bit already, but be curious the big picture. And then we can fold that into our conversation on Wednesday. Full preview where we're at going into that first preseason game. We can try to answer some questions as well, so leave them in the comments on YouTube at youtube.com/@1067thefan, where you can watch the full episodes of this pod. Some of you are doing that right now, and if you have, you made it this far, unless you're hate watching 45 minutes of content, go and hit that like button. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. And, of course, subscribe if you're listening on the audio platforms as well. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Odyssey app, whatever it is that you listen to your pods. Be back on Wednesday. Take 5 tomorrow. That's also why you got to subscribe to make sure that you get our little 5-minute bonus episodes, tackle some fun topics there. So we will see you tomorrow for Take 5, 2 days from now for Take Command, and then it is game time on Friday. That's it, and that's all for this show. Thanks for listening. See you. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.